Also, maybe like the days that we look like more people in front of Wasim. I think Wasim is like the camera guy.
We're live now.
Okay, perfect. Carrie, you can start. Welcome.
All right, great. Thank you so much. So welcome everybody to a demo lecture of astrobiology. This is one of the courses offered by MetaVisionaries Academy. So if you like what you see, please head to our website to register for a future full class. So in this series, we are going to talk all about astrobiology, starting with a basic introduction to what this field of research studies, then moving on to a history of life on Earth over time, followed by the search for life on Mars, ocean worlds in our solar system and whether or not they might harbor life, and finally the search for exoplanets beyond our solar system. And so this series is taught by several instructors. Sometimes Dr. James Green, the former chief scientist of NASA, will be your instructor. But today I will be your instructor. My name's Carrie Harris. I'm an astrobiologist. I'm currently a PhD candidate at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, where I study astrobiology and polar science. And my research is a combination of field and lab studies that focus on Mars analog environments. So places on Earth that are similar to my favorite planet Mars. And these include the Arctic, Antarctica, and the Atacama Desert in Chile. And I've also worked as an analog astronaut for NASA, where I simulated a multi-week space mission to Mars's moon Phobos. So let's jump in. Oops. All right, so just to give you an overview of what we're going to talk about today, first we're going to do an intro to astrobiology, what that means and the scope of the field, which is very interdisciplinary in nature, and why astrobiology is important to not only looking for life beyond Earth, but also understanding the origin of life on our own planet. We'll talk about the ingredients for life as we know it, what makes a planet habitable, and then how NASA is currently searching for life. So broadly, astrobiology is the study of life in the universe, and the field at large seeks to answer fundamental questions about the origin, evolution, distribution, and even the future of life. And some of these questions include, where do we come from? How did life originate on Earth? Is planet Earth unique in that we have life here? Did life originate on Mars? This question is very near and dear to my heart, as this is what my PhD dissertation is about. And then, are some of the outer solar system moons habitable? And more generally speaking, what are the chances for life beyond Earth? So to start, it helps to define our terms and make sure we're all on the same page with what is life? And if we were to look at a sample from another planet, how would we even know if what we're seeing constitutes life? So at the most basic, life is chemistry with a history and a memory. And what I mean by that is that life is a self-sustaining chemical system that's capable of evolving. That's the definition that NASA most prefers to use. But broadly, life as we know it has three attributes. It metabolizes, so it burns energy. It reproduces, it can duplicate itself, and it evolves. It will change over time in a way that is heritable. And so then there's some specifics of Terran life, life here on Earth, that might be universal or it might not. So life as we know it here on Earth uses water as a solvent. It's built from cells as the building blocks of larger life forms, and it exploits chemical energy gradients in order to power life. And it uses a two biopolymer structure known as DNA, which we will talk about a little bit later, where nucleic acids perform most genetic functions, and then proteins perform most catalytic functions. So there's some ingredients for life here on Earth that are universal to all life forms. And these are water, energy, and certain organic molecules and atoms, which are namely carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And then importantly, as far as we know, life also takes a long time to incubate and get going. So it's important to also include time in the ingredients for life. Whoops, get back. So NASA is currently searching for life beyond Earth in many ways. And so I'm going to talk about a few of these ways. The first is using a system that's called the ladder of life that I will show you more specifically in a second. And this follows the basic strategy of following water in our solar system to look for places where life might have evolved. Another way is to look at the size of organic material. It turns out that organic material of biological origin tends to be a bit larger than randomly composed organic material from abiotic or non-life sources. We can also look for gases that are produced by biological activity, especially by microbes like methane. And then we can look at the rock record for things like minerals that are formed by biological activity. We might also search for what I'm going to call weird life, which is life that isn't carbon-based, unlike most of the life, or all of the life we know on Earth, which is based on a reduced carbon molecule. And then we can also look for what's called technosignatures, or signs of life that aren't necessarily biological, but that, as far as we know, could only be produced by life forms. So this is the ladder of life I was mentioning before. So this is a way of categorizing types of evidence we might see on other planets from what we're calling suspicious biomaterials that might be associated with life, but aren't necessarily a smoking gun or 100% indicative of life, all the way up to that green zone, which are things that we only know to be produced by life. And so one of those is a DNA molecule. So I'll invite you to look up above you right now. This is a double helix DNA molecule where the different colors represent different nucleotides that bond together in a very specific way. And this is common to most forms of life on Earth. And so you will see DNA and RNA here on the ladder of life in that green zone, where if we found a DNA molecule on another planet, we could be pretty darn sure that's evidence of life. And so if your goal is to search for life beyond Earth, a pretty good bet is to start with a search for habitats. And that's because what happened on Earth, that is the origin of life as we know it, may have happened in other places as well. And so if we know the types of environments where life originated and thrives on Earth, we can look for similar types of habitats on other planets as a good starting point. And so this goes along with the so-called Goldilocks theory of life, where we want to search for planets that are in the habitable zone around their sun. So planets that are too close to the sun are going to be a bit too hot to sustain water, which, as we know, is a necessary ingredient for life. And if they're too far from the sun, they're going to be too cool. And so again, if you look above you, we can see this 3D model of the inner solar system of our solar system. So these planets are all in the correct size ratio to each other, but in reality, the sun would be a lot bigger. There we go. So now we can see these all aligned. So that inner planet Mercury is really close to the sun, and that is going to be outside of our Goldilocks zone. So there's not going to be any liquid water found on Mercury. And then the next three planets are Venus, Earth, and Mars, which are all in this habitable zone. But as we see, Earth is that beautiful characteristic blue marble that is in 70% covered by oceans, and obviously is home to everyone that we know and love. And so we can take this concept of habitable zones of planetary systems and apply it to other solar systems to search for planets that may be capable of sustaining life as we know it. And so this will help us answer one of the most fundamental questions that we have, which is, are we alone in the universe? Humans have been asking this since the beginning of recorded history. And as an example, I will read you this quote by Lucretius in the 1st century BC, who said, "In the universe, nothing is the only of its kind. In other regions, surely there must be other earths, other men, other beasts of burden." And so this is really fundamental to the curiosity that we have as a human race. And it's a really exciting field to be part of. And so even beyond asking, is there a microbial life on other worlds, we can ask, what are the chances of other intelligent life existing beyond Earth? So life that we might be able to have a conversation with. And one of the ways that we can answer that question is by contemplating what's known as the Drake equation. So this is an equation that was developed in the 1960s by Frank Drake. And he presented it as a thought experiment more so than a scientific equation. And it was designed to inspire a dialogue. So as we'll see when we examine the equation itself, it's hard to pinpoint an exact value for many of the components of this equation, but it helps us understand the types of things we should be looking for. And so the goal with this equation is to determine n, which is the number of civilizations in our galaxy with which communication is possible. So these would be what we would consider to be technical civilizations that have the ability of communicating not only with themselves, but with members of another species. And so we can go through the components of this equation, which are all multiplied together to give you that answer of n. And so the first is the rate of star formation, which is then multiplied by the fraction of those stars that host planets. And then the number of those planets that we would consider to be habitable based on their position from the sun. And then the number of those habitable planets that actually succeeded in developing life, multiplied by the fraction of that life that is what we would consider to be intelligent, which is then multiplied by the fraction of intelligent life that developed technology capable of interstellar communication. And finally, the length of time that those civilizations have occurred. And so down at the bottom of this slide, we've highlighted the different broad science disciplines that are investigating each component of this equation. And so some of the more basic ones, the rate of star formation and the fraction of stars that host planets, that's the domain of astrophysics. And then if we look out to the end of the equation, the intelligence, technology, and duration, that's really the domain of an organization called SETI, which stands for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And then what I'm mostly interested in is kind of the middle parts of this equation, which is what percentage of these planets are habitable and have any of those developed life. And so that is where astrobiologists come in. And so there's three main methods to search for life in the universe. The first is using in situ methods, where we're literally sending a rover or a lander to another planet and investigating evidence for life. And so right here we have my pal Curiosity, who has been walking the surface of Mars for about 10 years now, which is really incredible under any circumstances, but especially because this rover was only designed to last for 2 years, and we've gotten over 10 years of data out of it. And so if you look to the top of this rover, you can see the camera on it. And so this camera is responsible for some of those beautiful images of Mars's surface you may have seen. Another way of searching for life in the universe is with remote sensing methods. So these involve using satellites or orbiters to look far into space and kind of characterize planets based on aspects that can be remotely sensed, like their spectra. And finally, we have SETI observations. And so that's the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and they look for technosignatures deep in the universe. So I will go into that a little bit more. So SETI methods can cover our entire galaxy. So that's about 100,000 light years wide, which is pretty huge. So here, this image is showing our own spiral galaxy, which is kind of a barred galaxy. And you can see this yellow dot represents our sun. So we are one tiny little blip in this huge universe. And so this encompasses about 4 billion stars. And SETI methods indicate that about 10 to 60 billion of those planets host habitable planets in the Milky Way galaxy. So that's a huge number of planets that could potentially host life. Whoops. If we zoom in a little bit closer to home, remote sensing methods is limited to what we would consider to be our stellar neighborhood. So that's about 10 light years, as opposed to the 100,000 light years we were looking at in the last slide. And so this is relatively close to home. The center of this diagram is our sun. And so these remote sensing methods reach out about 12 light years. And these methods show us that there's about 6 candidate habitable planets. And importantly, we don't necessarily know exactly what these look like. And so these globes that are appearing above me are candidate alien worlds. And so they might look something like planets in our own solar system, or they might look completely unfamiliar to us. But again, we are looking for planets that are in that habitable zone relative to their own star where we think liquid water could exist. Whoops. Let's see. And then if we zoom in even closer to our own solar system, we can use in situ methods, which is when we are literally sending a rover or a lander or a probe to a different planetary body or a moon and looking for habitable environments. So these types of methods are limited to about 1.5 light years away from our own sun, which reaches out to the Oort cloud. And so this includes, the 9 planets, some of our Pluto and our other Kuiper Belt objects that are out at the distant end of the solar system. And what we see in here, if we go back to our habitable zones, is that while before we were thinking of Venus, Earth, and Mars being in the habitable zone, we have learned that some of these moons in the outer solar system support liquid water in oceans. And so these would be Europa, which is a moon of Jupiter that has a near surface ocean. And then Enceladus, which is a moon of Saturn, has a deep ocean. And Titan may have methane seeps. And so all of these 3 moons may also constitute habitable environments where it's worthy to search for life. Oops. All right, so we know that planetary environments are diverse. Most planet surfaces are cold and dry, but these interior planet environments may be more similar to Earth. It's also possible that subsurface oceans may be hot or cold, and that subsurface rock may be similar to Earth rocks, which we know can support life. And so here we are looking at Mars above us. It looks a little bit fuzzy because it does have a weak atmosphere, not as thick or as robust as Earth's atmosphere. And when you look at it, we can see evidence of past water activity. So you can see craters, some of which may have held ancient lakes. When you zoom in a little bit, it's also possible to see fluvial features, which show the influence of rivers that have since dried up. And so we can't discount Mars as a place to look for life just because it doesn't have large amounts of liquid water. And even at the bottom, you can see some of these polar ice deposits. And as we'll get to in a bit, we know from Earth that life really likes existing at kind of the interface between ice and other types of environments. And so one of the places where the search for life in our own solar system will take place is on Europa, which is a moon of Jupiter. And so this moon is ice covered. This little zoom in here is just showing what the surface ice looks like. It's a really dynamic environment with lots of scars and rifts on it. And so you might be thinking, why would a planet that's covered in ice be able to support life? Well, we might just get lucky and find that life did evolve there, and we can compare that to Antarctica here on Earth, which is another type of environment that we would think of as being really extreme. It's cold, it's dry, and yet it's also teeming with life, as exemplified by these Adelie penguins that are hanging out right at the edge of the ice and the water. Whoops. And while it's a little bit less likely that we would find these, charismatic megafauna like penguins just wandering around on Europa, it's also important to note that these under ice habitats are really favorable environments for much smaller organisms like microbes to live. It's also possible that Europa might have hydrothermal vents deep underneath its ocean, and this would also be a favorable environment for microbes to evolve and to grow. And we can compare that to sub-ice habitats on Earth, which have all sorts of life, not just penguins. So this picture on the left is showing you a permanently ice-covered lake in Antarctica. This is in the McMurdo Dry Valleys, and I conducted research there for a few years back in 2017, studying microbes that can live under these 20 feet of ice. They're really resilient, really robust. And then these pictures on the right are underwater photos showing the types of life that can also exist under ice. So the top two are looking up at an ice surface, and all that kind of gray matter and little blobby guys are microbes and invertebrates that are doing just fine and thriving in that ice-water interface environment. And then the bottom two pictures are showing hydrothermal vents under the water, which are great places for microbes to live because they can really exploit these unusual chemical gradients that you would find in a hydrothermal vent environment. All right, but let's talk for a second about our nearest neighbor, Mars. So we've got Mars up here at the top of the dome if you look up. And so this is a great view to look at some of these craters and other features of Mars. And whoops. And if it's a little hard to see in the big planet view, you can look at the slide, which is a zoom in of a valley network on Mars, where you can really see the evidence of water that existed a few billion years ago on Mars. And so you have these river networks and valleys, and they look very similar to environments on Earth where rivers are pouring into like a shallow ocean or a lake or something like that. And then the slide on the right is showing the abundance of hydrogen on Mars's surface. And so some of that hydrogen that's detected might be subsurface water. So Mars is another place where it's important to look for life. And so even if life isn't teeming on the surface of Mars, it's obviously not covered with trees the way some of Earth's continents are. That doesn't mean life couldn't exist underground, either in ice or in rocks. We know that on Earth, in some of these more extreme environments that we think of, like permafrost, which is soil that is below 0 degrees Celsius for a full year, hosts microbial communities. They tend to be a little bit more sparse and a little bit more slow growing than other microbial communities, but they are definitely there and they're definitely alive. We also know that microbes can live inside rocks, which is pretty incredible. These microbes are known as cryptoendoliths, and they can live up to 60 meters deep in just straight up rock. So in this picture, you see all the way to the right of the slide where there's a kind of like a black layer and then a green layer. Those are two distinct microbial communities that are thriving in rocks. And so these can live in places that might be subjected to like really extreme UV radiation, like rocks in the surface of a desert or places like that. So that's all I've got for you for the demo class today. So just to summarize what we've talked about, we defined the field of astrobiology and talked about the scope of it from within our own solar system to our nearby stellar neighborhood, and then all the way out to the scale of the Milky Way galaxy. We've covered the ingredients for life, which is water, organics, energy, and importantly, time. We've defined the concept of habitability and how scientists look for habitable planets, and how we are using habitability within our own solar system and beyond. And then finally, we talked a little bit about the search for life, the techniques that are used to search for both microbial and intelligent extraterrestrial life. And so that's a brief overview of the first lecture in this series. I hope you like it, and I would be happy to answer any questions, but to do the Q&A, I think we are first going to change our environment a little bit and hop over to Mars.
Yeah, let's go to Mars.
All right,
everyone.
great.
Oh, wow.
Okay, looks like everyone made it here to Mars. Welcome to Mars, if you haven't been here before. Behind me, I think, is Mount Sharp, or Aeolus Mons, which is one of the tall points in Gale Crater. Oh, good. And here we have Curiosity with us as well, who I believe is currently on the actual Gale Crater on Mars. So thank you all for coming, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
So, Carrie, we got a question from one of the live audiences, from Doug. Could self-replicating thylones on Titan have somehow bootstrapped self-replicating RNA?
Let's see. The second half of your question cut out. It was something about DNA on Titan.
Yeah, could self-replicating thylones on Titan have somehow bootstrapped self-replicating RNA?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. That's a little bit beyond my area of expertise, so I'm not sure what the answer is, but it's a really interesting question to ponder. Titan is a really unique and interesting planet, or world, and I'm excited to learn more about it. Yeah, thank you.
Anybody
Let's
else?
see.
I think Albert has a question.
Yeah.
Yes, Albert.
Albert, you're muted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
perfectly.
Oh, great. Hey, really great presentation. I really enjoyed that a lot.
Thanks.
I read recently that they detected phosphorus in the plumes coming out of Enceladus. I was just wondering if you could relay how important that discovery is for the possibility of life on Enceladus.
Yeah, definitely. So phosphorus, as far as we know, is one of the critical ingredients for life. It's involved in proteins, in DNA, and it's also a really important nutrient for most microbes. So the fact that it's mobilized and available in these plumes is a really cool phenomenon that I think suggests that if microbes were able to have originated, they would have an energy source to sustain themselves. So yeah, it's a really cool finding.
Thank you.
Carrie, may I ask,
Yes.
so how do you see yourself in the future? Like maybe you apply to be an astronaut, to be the astrobiologist, scientist, the astrobiology scientist in one of the future missions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've still got 2 more years of my PhD left. And
Okay.
after that, I will definitely be applying to be an astronaut. But if that plan falls through, then yes, my goal is to be involved with mission science. My PhD is about the search for life on Mars, so that's kind of near and dear to my heart. But there's so many interesting astrobiology missions happening in the near future that I would be honored to be involved with.
Nice. I hope you get to fulfill that life mission, because in fact it's a life mission what you're going to do. That's wonderful.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other question?
There's a question from
Albert, please.
Carrie, as far as future missions, could you give an idea of where there might be submersibles? I know I've heard about submersibles possibly being involved in future missions to Europa or to other worlds.
Yeah, definitely. I think Europa is the one on a lot of people's minds, also Enceladus. So there's some obviously engineering problems that will need to be solved with getting through these ice caps on some of these worlds. But yeah, that would be, next level interesting to send a submersible that can actually go to Enceladus or Titan and take some in situ samples and also just see what it looks like. We've never seen into another alien ocean before. So yeah, that would be really exciting.
I think the issue if you allow me to step in, I think the issue with these submersibles is like the cross-contamination, right? Like we need to make sure that this is like very, how can I say, like clean, excuse my lack of language, of lingual, because we don't want cross-contamination.
Yeah, definitely. So the planetary protection, both protecting other planets from Earth contamination is super important, and anything that is going to be landed on another planet has to pass certain levels of eradicating all Earth microbes that are on it down to a certain number of cells per square centimeter to try to ensure we are not doing forward contamination to any of these astrobiology targets.
Carrie, in terms of for example, careers like astrobiologists, why is it important to have a look at extreme environments like space and how what we learn about potential life out there, how that would impact the Earth itself?
Yeah, I think I understand your question. I guess asking kind of what the significance of finding a second genesis of life would be, or
no, more in terms
is that what you mean?
More in terms of what we discover out there, how could that be applied to the Earth itself from perspective of astrobiology?
Oh, I see. Yeah, well, to use Mars as an example, since we are currently standing on Mars, Mars has either no plate tectonics or much less intense plate tectonics than Earth. So it has rocks just sitting on the surface that are billions of years old that that no longer exist on Earth. So if life did originate on Mars around the same time it originated on Earth, some of the evidence we might find in rocks on Mars, or some of the conclusions we might make about the origin of life would also be applicable to, or potentially applicable, I should say, if either Mars seeded Earth or Earth seeded Mars. So the origin of life on Earth as well, and could help us understand life on our own planet better.
Perfect, thank you.
Let's see, all right, any other questions?
No, I think we're done. That was phenomenal. I mean, Jim did this earlier today, and you did the presentation now. It was absolutely brilliant, and it does have a different take to it. So I think this is for all of those who've watched or who will be watching. Hopefully, this really explains to you how this interdisciplinary approach to learning and connecting with industry experts like Carrie and some of the others you've met today really can define and build a pathway into what your future careers can look like. So, Carrie, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so we will.
Thank you, Carrie. Have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you so much. You all as well. All right.
All right, guys, we're going to be out. We'll look forward to catching up in a week's time. Take care. Good night.
Yeah.
Well
Bye
done,
bye,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Was